All right. We're back, and I hope our audience once again joins us. Downloading this might be problematic. Sorry, Gabe, for that. We'll do what we can. And I'm going to be very gentle with Edge. Edge is, of course, a terrible browser that invades the kernel space and probably caused that crash. So, all right, our friends from Taiwan, the Save Nuclear Energy people are back. Hopefully, our Twitch panel comes back as well. Great. Okay, number 4. Shiny new technology is cool. The kind that ensures real energy independence and solves nuclear waste problems. Bonus points if having them pisses off that stupid UN agency who keeps snooping around. Oh. I'm going to sound check 1 2. Sound check 1 2.
Sounds good.
On our side?
On the Zoom side.
Let's double check the live stream. Let me go to the live stream. Let's double live stream. Okay, yeah, PyProd, that is you. Okay, great. Okay.
Oh, PyProd.
Yeah, he's my super fan. Thank you for being here. Okay. U.S. presidents are cool, sometimes. The previous guy threw a spectacular tantrum at one stupid UN agency for ignoring us. Maybe if that new Biden fellow could do the same for the other stupid UN agency. Number 6, being dependent on China is monumentally uncool. And they produce all of the world's neodymium used in wind turbines and most of the world's silicon used in solar panels. Number 7, winning against South Korea is cool. They were all smug and superior about Samsung before TSMC started mopping the floor with them last year. Maybe if we do the same for their nuclear industry, things will change. Number 8, Lithuania is the coolest goddamn country in the entire universe. They also build really cool lasers, which might be good for enriching fuel, if only we are allowed to use that shiny new tech. That final one has got my curiosity up, Daniel. Tell us, what is it about Lithuania's laser technology that would be useful in enrichment?
Well, it's kind of a stretch, actually. Lithuania is apparently very good at building lasers. They are sort of the industrial lasers that cut things up, so I don't know how useful they would be in context. But as of right now, there is new technologies on the horizon called Silex that basically allows extremely energy efficient and therefore hopefully economically efficient separation of fissile uranium from natural uranium. Now, exactly how this technology works is, as of now, unknown. It is also unclear how different it is from previous atomic vapor and molecular vapor forms of laser enrichment. In any case, I do not think, barring very drastic changes in US policy of the sort that we talked about last time, I don't think that it is going to take off. But, it's exciting to think about.
Very cool. So,
yeah.
Essentially,
I guess what might be confusing some members of your audience is why Lithuania specifically.
Yeah,
and we might get into that.
Yeah. Do you want to cover that now, or go on your main topic?
I mean, it's part of my main topic, so.
All right. Well, let's hit it.
All right. So, I have been browsing the comments just now. So, 干净可能, hello. I am going to royally piss you off in this session, I believe. And just as a starter, I noticed that one of your comments was about how Taiwan is broadly pro-nuclear now. In which case, ha ha ha! Why did you not win the referendums last time? Huh? If that were the case. So yeah, just I guess sort of as I guess sort of as a prelude, it's sort of the our topic of today is sort of about the forces that is trying to bring nuclear down, political forces specifically. And so, we might be sort of we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about the politics of Taiwan. And that's the kind of topic that's obviously going to please everybody involved. So yeah, without further ado, I think we should get started. And just to gauge the audience and the presenter, I suppose I kind of want to ask sort of what's everyone know about sort of Taiwanese politics, past and present and future?
So we basically we kind of went over it in our disconnected segment of the stream, but basically, so Taiwan is basically a dictatorship that separated from the communist part of China, the communist revolution there in China, but then later became democratic. So at some point, Taiwan did embrace democracy, which is cool. But the existing nuclear fleet did come from this dictatorial regime. And that's the basis of it. But also through that dictatorship and the history of Taiwan's separation from China and the U.S.'s diplomacy with China, Taiwan is a bit of a bargaining chip or a political puppet in some cases. Is that unfair?
I would say it isn't. I think that there is a lot that's kind of missing from that, but nothing, I think, terribly unexpected, I suppose.
So that's my naive American perspective. Why don't you further educate us?
Right. So one of the things I feel is not appreciated about politics in Taiwan is that there were people in Taiwan, like before the Chinese Civil War started in 1949. And in fact, there were a lot of people. Estimates are that there were about 7 million people in Taiwan at the time, right? The kinds of people who moved over with the nationalist government numbered about 2 million, right? So you're talking about on the one hand a very big influx of just people, right, into a place where they have never been before. They don't even speak the same language, right? But on the other hand, like, these are clearly the minorities who held power using some rather unscrupulous means for half a century, right? Until finally slowly relinquishing power, right? The other thing is kind of just about sort of Taiwan embracing democracy, I suppose. And, there is some truth to that, right? I would say that the dynamic should not really be understood as Taiwan embracing democracy, because Taiwan, was authoritarian and then became democratic. No, it was that people, right? A lot of the 7 million that I mentioned were already here, as well as some of the 2 million who came from China but were dissatisfied for various reasons with the authoritarian regime. They fought hard during those half centuries to win democracy, right? And like that should not be overlooked, I think. And it is something that I think should like it should be part of the. It is going to hopefully be part of the nuclear energy discussion that we're going to be having today. So, yeah.
Great. Don't mind me if I'm slightly distracted. I'm just making sure everything's reassembled. So welcome back to any audience that has left us in the crash. We're back. We have Daniel Chen here representing his own wild opinions and not those of any particular government, educational, or professional industry or organization. So the response from our friends in the YouTube chat, the latest referendum failed because we didn't have enough people voting. And actually the pro-nuclear power votes were more than the against nuclear votes. So was the referendum a percentage of the population and turnout failed, or was it basically like a failure of quorum, or was it actually defeated?
It was actually defeated soundly, right? Oof. There were 4 referendum questions, right? Mm-hmm. The voters roughly split amongst party lines, with the exception of the nuclear referendum, which did substantially worse than the others, right? Don't lie to yourself, Ganqing He. You failed. You guys failed hard. And it's because you had an asshole as your movement leader.
Oof. Oh, there we go. Spicy.
Well, who we might talk about.
We've got it. And let me admit, in general, the strongest personalities tend to get things done, but also they can divide movements. I think we see that in the pro-nuclear space here in America, that unnecessary actions tend to divide up the movement in ways that really permanently harm the pro-nuclear movement. So be kind. Be kind.
I mean, part of me really wants to be the guy in charge of the pro-nuclear movement, but that's neither here nor there, I suppose. So I think that sort of the fact that that our nuclear plants were built by sort of the remnants of the military dictatorship. It has been mentioned. It is also underappreciated. The fact that the pro-democracy movement was in many ways built on the anti-nuclear movement, and in fact gained power due to Chernobyl is also not appreciated. So I don't know. Should we get into that?
Yeah, that's interesting. So around the 80s, 86 would be Chernobyl, and so yep. The embracing of democracy in Taiwan is that bound up sort of like suffrage and tolerance was bound up in America. We had this really weird confluence of women's suffrage, women's right to vote, and the tolerance movement. Temperance. So anti-alcohol, pro-democracy traveled together in U.S. politics, and there's all sorts of people who will be conspiratorially against feminism because it was against alcohol at the beginning.
It cut both ways.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, is that it can be more complicated than that. But these are not mistakes of ideology; these are mistakes of history. So, what is the mistake of history that tied democracy to the anti-nuclear movement?
Well, it kind of went like this. So, as I kind of mentioned previously, there were 7 million what we call natives, not indigenous people. So I guess let's start from the beginning, the ethnographics of Taiwan. So we had a bunch of people who moved here 5,000 years ago, who we now call the indigenous peoples of Taiwan. They are incidentally related to the Austronesian people. So your Hawaiian people, your people in places in New Zealand, Micronesia, Polynesia, all of those, right? Starting about maybe 500-ish years ago, the Dutch created the Dutch sort of created a trading post in Taiwan, and they needed large amounts of literate people to be running that stuff for them. Shipping literate people from Europe is tough, and so they reckon, hey, we've got a bunch of people like just on the other side of the narrow strait, willing to come here. And so that was kind of when there was mass migrations of essentially Chinese-speaking peoples from China to Taiwan. The descendants of those people are now sort of usually termed native Taiwanese, right? So people like me, right? And this arrangement kind of lasted until one of the pirates under Dutch employment essentially defected to the Chinese government, and so they kicked the Dutch out. Unfortunately, at the time, China under the Ming Dynasty was also facing a bunch of internal turmoil before finally being overthrown by the Manchurians, right? And so basically, shortly after the defection of that Chinese pirate, Taiwan was under control from essentially the Imperial Chinese court, as was understood at the time. And the Manchurian government didn't really care for Taiwan at the time. They sort of established controls, told the European powers to get the hell out, and that was about it. They kind of just didn't want, they didn't want foreign people messing about in their backyards. Until one fateful day in the mid-19th century, there was another island nation. It was being administered by a little girl, and the Chinese court thought, it's an island nation from the other side of the world. What can they possibly do? Oh, they're trading drugs here. That probably needs to be solved, right? And so, they shooed the island people out. It turns out that the island people really did not want to be shooed out. In case anybody's wondering about this, they were the British.
It's the Opium Wars, right?
Yep, it's the Opium Wars. So, the British won, surprising everybody. Honestly, including the British themselves, and so that kind of kick-started the Chinese government's awareness of the fact that we thought we were the center of the world, 中国 literally means central kingdom, right? It turns out we aren't anymore. Crap! What do we do? All right, and so there were a bunch of modernization projects going on. And one of the things that's underappreciated was just like a lot of the modernization sort of got their headway in Taiwan specifically, right? You're importing foreign technologies essentially. A lot of stuff that you do not understand, right? Electricity, that's lightning, that's gonna kill people. Trains, they can. You disintegrate if they go too fast or something like that. If you want to build scary science stuff, build it in the colonies, right? And so interesting is that Taiwan had the first, under the Qing government, we had the first telegraphs, we had the first power generators, and we had the first railways, right? None of this lasted very long because later in 1895, there was a new upstart in East Asia called Japan, right? They actually did successfully modernize, and they decided to fight with China over suzerainty of Korea. And Japan won. They didn't win. It wasn't so one-sided that China didn't have a say, and China decided that we kind of like Korea, right? So, there is this other island that you Japanese may or may not be interested in. Have that. South Korea, keep that to us for the time being, right? And so that was when sort of Taiwan became essentially became a Japanese colony. In fact, arguably, it's kind of debated Japan's first colony, and the Imperial Japan was a harsh regime, no doubts about that. But they were also extremely competent, right? The under Japanese rule, there was a time when Taiwan by itself supplied half the world's sugar supplies. The Japanese also had a monopoly on something called camphor, which no one knows what that is anymore, but it was vitally important for the fledgling petroleum industry back in the day. Interestingly, and this is also not often talked about, Taiwan was also hosted the second nuclear transmutation experiment in the world, right? Because you had Japanese physicists who were very interested in experiments that were done in Britain at the time. They decided to recreate it, and much like the Chinese, it was something they didn't understand and could go wrong. And so they said, if you want to do scary science stuff, do it in the colonies. Incidentally, that the accelerator is still there. But anyways, long story short, that didn't last terribly long. I mean, it lasted for 50 years, so I guess it's kind of long. But in any case, the good days, such as they were, ended in 1945, and essentially, Japan was defeated in World War II. They were asked to relinquish their colonial holdings, right? It kind of made sense that, at least for the time being, Taiwan is supposed to be was supposed to be administered by the nearest victor around, and the nearest victor around was obviously China under the nationalist government at the time. Now, sort of at the time, Taiwan welcomed this change, right? It's nice. So at least at the time to be administered by people who they didn't speak the same language, but at least they used the same writing system as you did, right? At the time, sort of gradually this delight, this post-war sort of euphoria kind of started waning thin. Taiwan started realizing that, hey, to use the word of a certain U.S. president, they weren't sending their best. They weren't sending their best over. And a lot of this was, to an extent, tolerated. I'd like to imagine that, first of all, Taiwan kind of felt guilty about the fact that, about World War II, because it was Japanese at the time, right? And you sort of had these very disheveled, you had these disheveled soldiers sort of wandering around, messing things up, but it was kind of tolerated at the time. But then you sort of had government administrators moving over, and they started seizing factory supplies. They monopolized alcohol and tobacco, things like that. One fateful day, sort of you had a police officer who was harassing a woman who was selling illegal tobacco on the streets. This sort of got out of control. There was a Taiwanese person who decided to step in to try and sort things out. and the police opened fire and killed him. This resulted in island-wide revolt, right? And for a very, very brief moment, Taiwan was independent, right? Somewhat foolishly, I suppose, they decided that they were going to negotiate terms with the nationalist government. It's just saying that stop sending so many people over. We know what we're doing. We do know how to govern ourselves. Just leave us be. We'll help you out in that civil war we've been hearing you've been having. And well, the nationalists just decided, they told the Taiwanese, yeah, sure. And then secretly they said, screw that, and sent a bunch of people here. And lots of people got horrendously murdered, right? And one of the things that really stood out to me about this was that to this day we don't know how many died. We don't even know who died, right? This was called the February 28th massacre. And it's just kind of a stain in Taiwanese history. It's also one that, there are people alive during the time. You ask them what happened, they will tell you that they have not heard or seen or done anything, right? They just refuse to talk about it. That was the kind of fear that was engendered at the time, right? And so that was 1947. 1949, the nationalist government basically truly did lose the war, right? And so they sort of retreated. They retreated to Taiwan, and they remember all the old rebellions that happened, and so they enacted martial law. At the time of its completion, it was the longest period of martial law in history, right? And the U.S. knew that all of this was going on. There is a book written by sort of the U.S. ambassador to China at the time called Formosa Betrayed, and it was just records of just horrible things after horrible things happening. But the U.S. kind of didn't pay attention to any of that, because as bad as essentially fascists were. Communism is the bigger enemy here, and so the U.S. kind of turned a blind eye to the fact that they are essentially propping up, they're propping up what is essentially a fascist regime in China, right? They turned a blind eye to the atrocities that were happening there. Until around sort of 1972. Actually, I should say just sort of the 70s in general. The U.S. foreign policy establishment really started realizing that, hey, Mao Zedong and Stalin really didn't get along very well, right? And so it might be a good idea to sort of form a wedge between them, and have the Chinese essentially sabotage the communist world, essentially. And so that was about the time when the U.S. started, cozying up to the Mao regime, essentially. And it was also around the time of the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward. Lots of people died in China too. To an extent, the U.S. didn't know about this. Again, to an extent, the U.S. did not care, right? But in any case, sort of all of this was kind of cemented in 1979 when the U.S. just definitively said, right, China nationalists, no hard feelings. This ain't personal. You're not China anymore, right? We're making friends with the other guys, right? And so sort of the nationalist government were like freaking out, right? They. This, suppression of 7 million people by 2 million, right? Being outnumbered 3-1, right, is scary. It's also not the sort of thing that is possible without a lot of outside intervention. And now the outside intervention is saying goodbye, right? And so they had to, essentially justify their existence to the Taiwanese people very quickly. And so they said, okay, so previously the existence was justified by saying that we're overthrowing the communist regime, we're reinstilling the rightful heir to the Chinese throne, right? All of that's out of the window. That is complete wishful thinking now. No, instead we are here because you were backwards, violent people underneath the Japanese, right? We are the modernized, civilized Chinese people who are going to improve your economy, right? And we're going to do that by building a lot of infrastructure, and of course, a lot of that infrastructure is 3 nuclear plants that were planned at the time, right? And of course, a lot of Taiwanese went along with this. A lot of Taiwanese didn't, right? Because like one of our former presidents called Li Denghui, he was trained at Cornell University as an agronomist. His PhD thesis was basically a gigantic rant about how back in the days of Japan was cutting off half the rice harvests of Taiwan to Japan. Nobody starved, right? And yet you now have the nationalist government in charge, right? And they are sitting here. None of the rice is getting exported. Everybody was starving, So there were, but it was tough for these kinds of people who were fighting back, right? Taiwan was doing reasonably well in the 70s and early 80s, and there are lots of people who understandably just didn't want to rock the boat on doing something that's extremely dangerous, right? The economy is improving, the government is still as repressive, right? And so sort of you had so essentially you had a bunch of disparate pro-democracy people and movements that all disagreed with the military dictatorship for various reasons, but they had both sort of logistic and ideological difficulties getting together, right? Because getting together literally can literally get you killed, right? And then sort of the opportunity for these pro-democracy activists came in 1986, right? Because then what you had was you also had another tyrannical government, right? That said that claimed to be sort of improving the livelihoods of the people, putting it first above all, right? They also built nuclear plants to that effect, and one of their nuclear plants blew up and killed a bunch of people, right? Ooh. And so it's kind of it's kind of the enlightenment movement for a lot of people. Then it was just like sure, standing up to the government gets you killed, right? If you don't stand up, you get killed all the same by the nuclear plants, right? And so it was basically the catalyst for all these disparate pro-democracy activists to kind of get together. And get together they did, right? In the most ballsy way possible. They basically rented out the poshest hotel in Taipei, right? Ostensibly for a dentistry conference, right? And you just had all these people just flooding in, and basically the point of that is that it being a very posh hotel, you had a lot of foreign dignitaries and foreign journalists there, right? And so they get to do they do illegal things, but sort of the message to the government is kill us, go on, kill us all if you dare, right? And that was when illegally at the time the Democratic Progressive Party was formed, right? It was just a bunch of people who basically said that they are mad as hell and they're not taking it anymore, right? And of course, Chernobyl being the catalyst of why these people got together in the first place, well, at least one of the catalysts, right? At the time, you literally had a book, right, titled "Fighting Nuclear to Fight Tyranny," right? And so sort of this was how the ideas about nuclear energy was sort of intertwined with the pro-democracy movement, and it still is sort of intertwined to this day, right? The Democratic Progressive Party, for better or for worse, is an extremely fractured party. Like their leadership and their members butt heads to this day all the freaking time, right? The one of the few things that can get them together to agree on anything at all is that we should not build the nuclear plants, right? And sort of one of the interesting things that should be appreciated is that the Democratic Progressive Party, is touted as being a pro-Taiwanese independence party right now by both commentators at home and abroad. This is very true, but it should be appreciated that before they were a pro-Taiwanese independence party, they were an anti-nuclear party. So, yeah. Well, that was a very long talk.
No, it's so it does some way parallels this history of anti-nuclearism in America, where it is the labor the labor left had a bit of a fight with the coal companies that union busted in Appalachia on the east side of the U.S., and the pro-labor, pro-democratic party was fighting against these coal companies. And so we had Rocky Mountain Institute and the attempt to unseat their power, the power of the coal companies, by diversifying assets in that region and by sort of taking environmental regulations on sulfur oxides and sulfurized coal, dirty coal, very dirty coal, was unfashionable and eventually effectively banned. And so the coal companies got even more aggressive in, complying with that, not just introducing scrubbers, but they actually left that region for places that had less sulfur, less sulfides in the coal. And so that's where all of the jobs actually left even harder than the union busting, and they're they're out west now. And so not only did that backfire in some ways, but it also solidified the idea of anti-nuclearism is a democratic value. And so we have here the Democratic Progressive Party is against Chernobyl. And this is the original referendum that emboldened people against the Chinese Nationalist Party. And then you're saying, well,
it was not there was no referendum, right?
Okay. The political movement, I should say.
Yeah. So yeah, this was illegal, right? All of these people could have been killed. They didn't care, right? They were mad and they weren't going to take it anymore. This was kind of the impetus of why martial law was essentially lifted, because keeping it there isn't going to do anything anymore, right? And then I suppose as one of the interesting things, one of the things I think that should possibly be mentioned, because we did mention the Huffington Post article, was that one of the first things that was mentioned in that Huffington Post article was that shutting down nuclear plant 2 was akin to bulldoze. I think the term was bulldozing the entire renewable energy generation in Taiwan, said by Seaver Wong. And I kind of contacted Seaver Wong in private and I said, "Ha, funny you say that. People's houses were actually bulldozed in building that plant." Yeah, I mean, it's like, I was also sort of, it was also mentioned in that article, like, that plant had the was enough to offset all the carbon emissions of Kenya. Who gives a crap about Kenya? No, Kenya was one of the countries that decided to decided to think that we aren't a country anymore. Screw them, right? So yeah, it's just like there is a lot of cruelty that happened so that the plant can get built, right? And I really feel that until the pro-nuclear movement in Taiwan, certainly, hopefully abroad as well, understands history and understands these kind of dynamics, sort of the broad attitudes towards nuclear just will not change. But of course, perhaps getting to the second part of this talk, which is that, the pro-nuclear movement in Taiwan is not about to sort of analyze the history and politics of all this, because frankly, the nuclear establishment and nuclear advocacy in Taiwan is a wing of the Nationalist Party. So, yeah.
So let me change the on-screen title a little bit. So what does that new pro-nuclear Taiwan look like ideally? This is, as you said in your paper, sort of a pro-democracy, pro-nuclear Taiwan. What's the end goal there?
The end goal there is to get Taiwanese people to like nuclear. And to get them to like nuclear energy needs to be something that is tangible to the Taiwanese, right? In terms of how it works, its benefits, what Taiwan and Taiwanese people are allowed to do with it. I will give an example of this. So I mentioned Czechia in the TLDR, right? Now, Czechia is a very interesting country. It is, by a lot of measures, possibly the most pro-nuclear country in the world. They are so pro-nuclear, they do not have a pro-nuclear movement because they don't need one, right? Just 2/3 of the people thinks that, most of the people there thinks that generally want more nuclear plants. 2/3 of them think that having a grid without a nuclear plant is literally unthinkable, right? Now, why is that? I actually had an interesting talk with a Czech person quite almost a year ago now. He kind of told me that, Czechia is a country that had a lot of industrial background in its history, right? And it was an industrial background which the Soviet Union noticed, right? And so when they were building, when the Soviets started designing and then building the RBMKs, they made one of the things that the Czech government, the Czech public government, made sure to have happen is that Czechia is going to be able to scratch build an RBMK. They were also going to be able to fuel it with supplies and equipment and technology that was available in Czechia at the time, right? And so, the way it was described to me was that most Czech people do not understand how nuclear energy works. They think that involves pushing a bunch of green goop through tubes, right? But it is green goop through tubes that, a friend of a family or a family of a friend made, right? And so, there was a lot of public trust in Czechia with regards to nuclear and with regards to RBMK specifically. So much so that when Chernobyl happened, they thought, it's the stupid Ukrainians messing things up. We smart Czech people wouldn't do that, right? And so, it was with this that sort of even after they regained independence, even after they now don't use RBMKs anymore, they use the VVERs, there is still a lot of public confidence in these plants, which does not exist in Taiwan. And, just as a collateral and related to what we were talking about in our last session, it also bears mentioning that at least in terms of nuclear technology sharing, the Soviet Union are less of assholes than the United States is.
You mean present? Was it historically they were less assholes, and then presently is Russia also not as bad as the U.S.?
I mean, in terms of nuclear technology sharing, certainly, right? The U.S. doesn't allow partner countries to enrich or reprocess, right? Through either either explicitly, which is the case with Taiwan, and we might get into that, or implicitly, which is basically everybody else. So, yeah, and like that kind of, and I kind of want to sort of expand on this point slightly, which is that this sort of public, this sort of tangibility with regards to nuclear energy doesn't exist in Taiwan. Like certainly in the 80s, but I would argue right now as well, sort of the knowledge about how you operate nuclear plants isn't exactly open. And I don't mean in the sense of, there are websites telling you how nuclear physics works or things like that. I mean that there is a lot of like just societal gatekeeping with regards to who are considered experts, who are allowed to have opinions about nuclear versus who is not, right? And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the fact that the Taiwanese pro-nuclear movement is not going to be considering the error of its ways simply because they're run by assholes, right? One of the examples of this is like I know that I probably really pissed off. Pissed off Ganji Keneng already, but I'm going to piss him off even more by saying that the referendum, specifically the one that happened last year, about whether or not we are keeping or getting rid of our fourth nuclear plant, right? It was the anti-nuclear side that managed to get a professional nuclear engineer to argue for their case. The pro-nuclear side got an internet troll. And it's just, it's kind of like if it's it's perhaps a bit like if I don't know, Stephen Chu, if Stephen Chu argued that the Diablo Canyon should be closed, right? And his only opponent was Michael Schellenberger. Oof. And I'm sorry if I'm pissing off a lot of Michael Schellenberger fans in the audience, whoever they are. I don't care. But yeah. Like also just while I'm on the subject, I suppose, just the fourth nuclear plant is just, it's something that I'm sort of very emotionally conflicted upon, because the fourth nuclear plant, it's an ABWR. It's honestly a good reactor, right? Amongst the 4 plants that were sited and basically constructed in Taiwan, it is the one that had the least amount of repression that went into its construction, let me put it that way, right? And yet it is also the plant that I have extremely strong negative feelings for, because that plant was supposed to be finished in 2014. Now, 2014 was also, first of all, the time when I was extremely active within the Taiwanese pro-nuclear space. It was also when the Section 123. It was also when the Section 123 agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan was going to expire, right? Now, for various political reasons, the Nationalist Party administration at the time, and along with sort of the nuclear establishment, knew that there was going to be political turmoil that year because a lot of things was going on. They do not want the plants to be caught up in that turmoil, right? They don't want excuses for anti-nuclear people to object to the plant, right? And one of those excuses might be that, hey, if we do not have a new 123 agreement with the US, technically this plant is legal, right? And so to make sure that everything went by smoothly, like without consulting anyone pretty much, right? The Mao administration basically decided to sweeten the deal for the US and say, hey, that gold standard you worked out with the United Arab Emirates, right? We're going to take it. Taiwan is not going to enrich or reprocess its own fuel anymore, right? And as a bonus, right, all other 123 agreements expire after 30 or 40 years. Ours is different. Ours is going to last forever, right? And so for the sake of building that plant, right, every single nuclear engineer of note, every single nuclear engineering professor, right, the entirety of Tsinghua nuclear engineer of the Tsinghua nuclear engineering department, they sold their soul to the devil to make that plant built, right? And sort of it was honestly to escape a lot of this sort of emotion that I decided not to further study nuclear engineering in Taiwan anymore and escape to Canada, right? It didn't end up helping. I was still very emotionally conflicted while I was in Canada. I was sort of doom scrolling through referendum news about people sort of deciding whether or not the plant should be closed. And it's just, I don't know. On one hand, you have a reasonably okay plant. On the other hand, it's a spawn of devil. Close it. Close everything, right? Purge our country of American reactors so that we don't have to live with this stupid agreement anymore.
Right. And so to sort of summarize this position, you're showing us that in the Czech Republic, the nuclear expertise, the national support, the supply chain is complete. It is a complete solution where
it was.
Oh, it was. Okay, well, it was end to end. They own their own fuel fabrication, mining, sourcing the fuel, the expertise to build, maintain, operate these reactors, and this creates unity within the national support for nuclear energy. Even if the public in general doesn't understand it, there is that trust, the trust of someone near you, someone in your family knows how these reactors work, where the energy comes from. It gives them a job. It gives you, the means of production happens because of this nuclear thing. And this is what you want for Taiwan. You want new national pride in being able to build things, which Taiwan has in some sense, but it's only in limited industries. It is in industries that are very highly energy dependent. That chip manufacturing is energy dependent. It is resource extracting dependent, and that energy comes directly from fossil fuels today. It's from resource extraction. And so you're being held back by the dependence on mining. And one thing Taiwan does not have an enormous amount of is land. It doesn't have land for enormous resource extraction. It doesn't have it for fossil fuel extraction. And so it is, teetering on a very delicate balance of maintaining this technical expertise that depends on the outside resources coming in. So alleviating that perhaps with nuclear technology would mean that you could have doped silicon from nuclear technology, you could have energy from nuclear technology, and then that broadens the specialization within semiconductors, so that not only are you great at the top end, the fabrication, but you're also enriching that silicon resource, and you're also bringing in the energy. It would grow the entire industry and keep those profits local rather than letting them be captured by outside interests.
It isn't really even that keeping the interests local necessarily, right? So one of the sort of touted advantages, supposedly, of nuclear energy is that is one of energy security, right? But the sort of way that energy security is argued, so how nuclear energy is supposed to create energy security is very narrow and seriously flawed with regards to how it understands energy security. Right now, if Taiwan chooses to go nuclear, and that's sort of let's sort of get ahead of ourselves a bit and say that suppose Taiwan wants to go all in on nuclear, right? What does it mean for Taiwan? It's very simple. It means that you buy U.S. fuel and U.S. reactors. You get to follow their instructions, put it in, put everything together, and then make power, and that's it, right? There are a lot of engineering decisions that you don't get to make. Lots of things that should be very fun to play with. You're not allowed to, right? And sort of most importantly, right? It requires, right, periodic shipments of fuel from one singular country, which is the U.S., right? And this is something that honestly, the anti-nuclear movement in Taiwan has caught on a lot more firmly than the pro-nuclear movement, right? The U.S. doesn't even sell you U.S.-made fuel; they sell you laundered Russian stuff, right? And so basically, energy security and energy security by nuclear advocacy, both at home and abroad, right? The way that they argue for energy security case for nuclear is that, it's high density energy, right? One boatload can last us for a year, right? And that's very true. So what? First of all, it still needs to come in by boat. That boat can still be sunk, right? And second of all, as we're seeing with the case with Ukraine, right? If any conflict occurs, there is a good chance it's going to last more than a year, right?
Yeah.
Contrast this with natural gas, which everybody, which the nuclear orthodoxy says is bad for energy security, right? But Taiwan can source natural gas from 12 countries in equal amounts if need be, which it actually does, roughly, right? If any one of those countries go AWOL for whatever reason, still 11 to choose from. This is energy security. It's also very expensive, but so what? Taiwan is rich, right? And sort of the answer to this is, but those ships can get, those ships can get blown up, right? Good. The ships blowing up is going to be headline news everywhere. It's going to be very photogenic. People are going to start paying attention, right? Contrast this with nuclear, where even if the energy security argument does hold, right? It's going to be a bunch of Western countries, most of whom don't recognize Taiwan as a country, right? Saying, Taiwan's being invaded, their people are dying, we're still getting our chips, it's all fine, right? Recklessly endanger, almost recklessly endangering the chip, right? If you sort of think about it from the Taiwanese perspective, that's secure, right? Because it's actually hitting those. I'm just going to say it. It's going to hit those Western assholes where it hurts. Right? Make them pay attention to these people that they've ignored for all these decades. Right? You can't do that with nuclear, right? At least not yet.
Right.
No, nuclear. If we play our cards right, nuclear can be that. And when I say play our cards right, it mostly involves getting a nuke. So
dangerous territory there, of course. But we have seen arguments even from that asshole that you don't like. We like the argument, in fact, that nuclear technology can be a liberating force. Not to say this is something that I'd universally endorse, but there are a lot of people out there that endorse the idea of independent nations not being truly independent on the global stage until they have nuclear weapons. And we do see that over and over again. As controversial as it is basically a fact of the world. So either they're a host to U.S. nuclear weapons, or they fall under the dominion of Russia or China, and basically they are subject to being invaded and to being bullied by the nuclear powers of the world.
mean, you don't even really need to go as far as nukes, right? Or at least Taiwanese nukes. Just for the, like, just for sake of our, just sort of as an FYI, I mentioned before that sort of Taiwan, along with everybody else in the world, right, is dependent on Russian enrichment, right, which is being held by Rosatom. Recently, what it transpired was that Rosatom was transporting essentially weapons-grade plutonium to China, right? And so, in a pretty direct way, not only is, nuclear, hypothetically nuclear energy in Taiwan giving money to people who are perpetrating really real and very horrific, human rights atrocities in Ukraine right now, they're also funding Chinese nukes that's going to be used against us. What kind of an energy security regime is that, really, right? That's just burn, in contrast, that's just burn gas. It's gonna make global warming worse, but it's gonna make our security much better, frankly.
So we've finally collected one of our degrowth trolls on YouTube chat, but before we dig into this, I'd love to hear Chris Bergen, if you have any questions. I'm sorry that Gabe had to go. He had to leave early. We are sort of rounding out our hour of content, and I'd love to entertain the degrowthers in chat. But if there's anything we want to wrap up on our subject of nuclear in Taiwan first, let's get to that.
Wrap it up. Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, it's just, lots of work needs to be done. As I kind of mentioned in our previous chat, it's just, nuclear energy can be a lot of good things, right? Chiefly energy security, and it's not allowed to be that, right? So that kind of needs to change. And then after we have that, that's when, you can start talking about sort of societal changes that can happen in Taiwan, that I believe can and should happen in Taiwan. Because honestly, at the moment right now, right, it's just like, I seriously doubt that the Thai administration is thinking about the energy security implications of nuclear quite as lucidly as I was talking about right now. But all the same, right? There is a lot of people, the pro-nuclear advocacy in Taiwan loves to say, oh, nuclear waste is not the big deal. We have technologies to deal with it. We can recycle it. And then it's actually the anti-nuclear people who go looking through the laws and say, actually, you know what? We're not allowed to do that, right? Under the international law. And, it's like, it's just like, the president is anti-nuclear. That's fine. That's her prerogative. But even if she had an opportunity to rethink this, would she be impressed by what she is seeing? And I honestly saying, I've got to say no, right? The whole reason why I got, the whole thing that set me off on this on this whole Section 123 rabbit hole was that back in 2017, right, the pro-nuclear movement was doing really badly at the time, right? I thought that something should be done. I said, okay, I'm going to make educational YouTube videos about new reactor designs and sort of about sort of nuclear science in general, right, to get people to understand that this thing is, well, first of all, safe, but also, new and interesting and exciting, and you can do lots of things with this, right? And so I went to the professors at Tsinghua and I told them that, hey, can I have your input as to sort of the potential of new nuclear designs in Taiwan? And they told me, oh, no. You are not allowed to imply that we are building Generation 4 reactors. And I said, why not? And he said, well, because doing so would imply that Taiwan is thinking about annulling our agreements on our Section 123 agreement. And I didn't understand what that meant at the time, right? So I looked it up, and it made me mad, right? It made me mad that these assholes sold their soul to the devil to build a nuclear plant for it made me mad that I got into I'm going to admit it, I got into nuclear through thorium. I've since kind of fallen out of love with it, but there are a bunch of exciting new technologies that I want to get into. I'm not allowed to touch any of that, right? Simply because all of them, to actually get benefits from those, you need reprocessing, right? And no one, there are nuclear advocacy basically goes, reprocessing. We know how that works. You see the anti-nuclear people go stand in the corner, right? And they never ever mention that the fact that it's technically doable. We aren't allowed to do it.
In Taiwan, let's be clear,
Yeah.
Taiwan is not allowed to do it because of Section 123. The U.S., we're allowed to do it. We're just too skittish about our unreliable regulators. And so we do not, by practice, do it in the U.S. Uranium's cheap. We mine it up and we can make our own fuel. Hopefully we will, so that the U.S. advanced reactors can take off. And we are victims of our own dependence on Russian uranium fuel. We are caught with our pants down because of the invasion of Ukraine, because of the and as well as France. They do not have their own enrichment fabrication. Well, they might have fabrication. They don't have their own enrichment capabilities, and so they continue to import Russian fuel, and the anti-nukes love to beat us up with this fact.
Yes.
And it is shameful. It really is. So what do we do? How do we encourage people around the globe to have a safe fabrication fuel enrichment technology? It seems to be a pure contradiction in terms that we don't allow the quote-unquote worst regimes, most unstable regimes to do it, but we also don't let our friends do it. And the more you are the U.S.'s friend, the more closely we look at your agreements and why and how you are or aren't complying with our demands. So it really makes a friendship with the U.S. makes nuclear technology extremely problematic unless you're a nuclear weapons nation already. Isn't that funny?
It is. So much for so much for non-proliferation, I guess. India grabbed the nuke, right? Primarily because it was under U.S. sanctions, because they wanted to pursue a thorium cycle. Incidentally, so Piprod, hi. Last time I was on, you kind of asked about non-proliferation people saying that CANDO is a proliferation magnet, and you asked, isn't that silly? Yes. First of all, yes, that is silly. A lot of all the faculty members here in my department complain about it in private, but also this is also where. But sort of the India incident was also sort of where all this started. I think that Canada is right to be mad. They are wrong to be mad at India, because India is not the one who's going around telling people that CANDOs are unreliable, right? So, but anyway, as for sort of how you solve that. Honestly, and this goes back to what I was talking about last time I was here. I would advocate just throwing caution to the wind, right? And just saying that all countries, by right, enshrined upon them, ironically, by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, should just be allowed to enrich and reprocess, right? And they are not considered a proliferation hazard until actual tangible evidence is provided that they are. Right, and it's like, it sort of goes into what I was mentioning last time I was here as well. It's just nuclear advocacy has gotten used to the idea, correctly, that there is no such thing as perfect safety, and perfect security, perfect proliferation resistance is even more silly than that. Especially at the kinds of scales that we need to be building nuclear plants if we want to stave off climate change, which is one nuclear plant every other day for the next 40 years. How, what kind of,
Well, one every other day. That's 100% with massive growth.
That's 100% with energy growth in not population growth, just energy use growth in developing countries, right? And if you want, and also it is energy, not electricity,
right?
Energy, right? You cut those, you can cut off some of those assumptions, and I would argue that you would have an extremely dystopian future if you did, right? But fundamentally, just like cutting off any one of those assumptions is not going to reduce it by much. It would be 2 every week for the next 40 years rather than 1 every other day. So
right, I would say that, okay, if we're going to be multipolar about our climate solution and say, okay, we can allow some renewables in the short term, that's a quarter of your goal. So I agree with, let's say I agree with your math. Energy with population growth, not just electricity, but energy and energy use growth is about 4 gigawatts per month. And China so far seems to be taking a quarter of that development. Wouldn't it be great if
to be taking a quarter of that development? I am extremely skeptical about the fact that they will. Right? China is saying that they're going to build 150 reactors in the next 10 years. Right? China, throughout its development history, has built 50. So take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Well, they need to. They need to make hay while the sun is shining. They have a demographic advantage that is rapidly disappearing. And so if they don't take advantage of this, if they don't, make something of this demographic advantage, they will be out in the cold, like the U.S. is going out in the cold.
I mean, coal is an option.
That's what they'll do, probably.
Yeah, and frankly, there are, I have classmates in nuclear engineering who is on quote unquote team coal, because of reasons like this.
Yeah.
Right? At the end of the day, just coal is, coal is not restricted the same way. You can burn it however the hell you want, right? There is no, international coal energy agency to say, to survey your coal plants 24/7 to see if you comply with, coal proliferation measures or anything.
Wouldn't it be great if? Yeah, wouldn't it be great if the IPCC treated coal plants like the IAEA treats nuclear plants? I mean, that would be some real climate action there.
Yeah, I doubt the developing countries would, like you terribly much for that. But yeah, that would be meaningful climate change. That would be a meaningful climate change action, to be sure.
Maybe the real goal would be degrowth, really, then, because all of our industries would be regulated. So let's hard shift degrowth. We've got Ujjal Shil here is telling us that degrowth is the only solution. Not even green energy. So wind and solar are going to fail. The only solution is degrowth. Is that going to mean 5 billion people dying? Sorry, 8 billion people dying by 2050 in order to sustain our climate?
I mean, frankly, frankly, just to entertain the trolls for a bit, I'm not sure if I should do that, but sure. Just to entertain the trolls a bit, you know what's really good for degrowth? Nuclear. I'm sorry, that got a bit dark, but yeah.
Well, of course it's dark, but then there's the trade-off. There's folks like Mike Stass who say that, well, it's just going to happen. Disaster is coming. You need to prepare for the worst. You need to get your guns and your bunkers and become an eco-prepper like myself and live in a fully sustainable house and go off-grid. Oh, except I'm not off-grid, and be your own doctor, except I'm not my own doctor. And it's difficult to be it's difficult to actually commit to degrowth.
It is.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like sort of bring the conversation back slightly. It's like, that's honestly speaking, right? And I hope that this is appreciated by Western audiences listening to this show right now. But like, that is a very Western-centric concern and way of thinking about all of this, right? Because frankly, it's just like the rest of the world, we don't care, right? I keep telling this to people, and it's just surprising how much they try and sort of they get offended by this, which is like Taiwan fundamentally does not care about climate change, right? It's like, we pretend we care about climate change, right? We talk about how we're going to be 20% carbon free by I don't know what the date is now, even 2035 probably, right? To me that's not a meaningful goal, right? To me, sort of climate change is you either you go hard or go home, basically. 20% isn't meaningful in the case of climate change. What it is meaningful though is that it is just about enough carbon credits for TSMC to buy the whole lot and say, you're technically using carbon-free chips. You're welcome.
Technically
And,
carbon free.
And none of our domestic industries are that, but so what? Those aren't subject to international tariffs. So, haha, right? And it's like to sort of bring it back to the 2022 referendum. Like there were 4 questions on that ballot, right? That 2 of which are worth talking about. Other than the nuclear plant 4-1, right? One is do we build a new gas terminal, right? Next to some algal reefs that are kind of endangered and dying, right? The choice of the Taiwanese people was pretty clear on that. Screw the algal reefs. I want to keep my lights on, right? Second thing, and this is sort of worth talking about in this, is that there was also a referendum to saying, do we or do we not import food from Fukushima, which may or may not be contaminated with radioactive isotopes. Now, I am going to ask you a question. You are probably going to guess it correctly just simply due to how I asked it. But do you think that the pro-nuclear side are for or against imports from Fukushima?
Oh, knowing how black-pilled you are, I'm going to guess they are against it.
Yes.
Oh. Why would you not bite that bullet? That is monumental cowardice. That is really shameful.
I mean, it's I kind of alluded to very, very early on in our talk that in many ways Taiwan is still still a Japanese colony, right? Japan is Japan on the one of the anecdotes was that there was a history professor studying modern Chinese history, modern East Asian history more generally, who sort of had a chat with a Japanese ambassador and said, "What is still Japan's views on Taiwan?" And Japan says, "Oh, Taiwan, we love Taiwan. They don't hate our guts, unlike everybody else." But anyway, it's kind of sort of bringing it back on topic, I suppose. The pro-nuclear side is very, in Taiwanese terminology, we call it blue, right? Which means that they are pro-China, which China they are pro is up for debate, but they are pro-China. They believe that Taiwan is part of China, again, which China, up for debate, right? and mostly as a result of just bad blood. Bad blood during World War II. They really hate Japan, right? And sort of the pro-nuclear movement being part of that establishment, they are also very anti-Japan, and so sort of the anti-nuclear movement, by extension, is also sort of very, very anti-Japan, right? And so, sort of that is sort of where all this stuff about sort of where this nonsense about supposedly pro-nuclear people advocating that we should not be we should not be importing food from Fukushima comes from. And it's just like it's political. The pro-nuclear side, both at home and abroad, they love to say that the biggest problem with nuclear is politics, right? People are against nuclear for political reasons, and that's true. But first of all, it isn't helpful, right? It'd be nice if you can tell me sort of what the politics is and how you might solve it. But also, secondly, again, both at home and abroad, people are pro-nuclear for a host of political reasons as well, and it's not wrong to like things for political reasons, but be honest about it. Don't tell me like follow the science if you're not going to follow the science on foods from Fukushima, right? It's just ridiculous.
Right. So our degrowth. So sorry to tangent. We're getting stun locked here. So our degrowth troll is pro fossil fuels, anti-humanity, thinks we are all going to die because we have destroyed the entire habitat, and still no nuclear. So nuclear we need because it's a solution, because the rest of it, does do much more damage to habitat. I mean, of course, renewables do much less than fossil fuels, but they use a lot of land. They use a lot of scarce minerals, scarce critical metals, and so it is problematic to rely solely on renewables. I think that, I'm in favor of making peace with the pro-renewables crowd, very controversial in the activist space, I know, but it's something that we can try. We can try by 2050 to be a decarbonized society, and it's achievable, I think, if we actually commit to the timetable that China claims they're going to hit. Even if we get half of that, a quarter of that, it's better than nothing. And it gives plenty of room for renewables to fill in the last 75% of our energy demand.
Frankly, so China's timetable is a problem, which I don't think many people realize. China, on paper, this is their stated policy, is going to build more coal than anything else they're going to be building put together. So,
because they're going to continue to eliminate poverty. They're going to bring.
It's something that I really feel needs to be hammered into the heads of pro-nuclear people, climate change and pro-nuclear people especially, is that you do not decarbonize by building clean energy. You decarbonize fundamentally by getting rid of fossil fuel sources, right? And building nuclear energy, building solar, building wind, right? Those are stuff that you do to mitigate to various extents the consequences of not building more fossil, right? But by themselves, they're not the solution, right? Right.
Well, it's the combined. I think it's the pathway to reducing fossil fuel dependence.
Yeah. It's also something that I'm pissed off everybody today already. So whatever.
Go ahead.
It's like there is amongst certain like pro-nuclear communities, most especially I'm going to name and shame the Breakthrough Institute. There is kind of this undercurrent with sort of the idea that the developed countries should move on to nuclear to make room for. The developed countries should move on to nuclear to make room for developing countries that will burn more fossil fuels. And I think that's I don't like that, right?
Yeah.
Because, frankly, France did not decarbonize with nuclear. I know it's a common meme amongst pro-nuclear people, but France did not. Right?
They grew their economy. They grew their
They
capability.
grew their economy. Their carbon sort of stayed still for a bit, right? And then it gradually tapered off because they were getting rid of their aging plants because they built the nuclear and they don't need it anymore, right? So basically to even decarbonize with nuclear, even with nuclear, right? You need to get nuclear in the place of those carbon plants before they are even built, right? And that is mostly going to be happening in developing countries, right?
I think there is a case for looking at the development of energy in the U.S. There is a case supporting it, and I'm afraid to put this chart on the screen because it'll crash. It'll crash my window capture again, unfortunately. But yeah, basically, if you look, the U.S. has been under the thumb of coal since 1880 and onward, and so we have been entirely dependent on coal since 1880, petroleum since 1920. And natural gas since 1970, and nuclear only started up in 1970. So the fact that we did not add nuclear meant that natural gas was the technology that phased out coal. And whereas in France, yes, the fossil fuel use, the oil and gas use remained constant, but nuclear did prevent adding new fossil fuels. So if we have developing countries that have relatively little fossil fuel use and we really help them build out that capability much faster than we are today, we can succeed. I don't think that we are headed in that direction. We are absolutely looking at regions that are facing civil war again for resource scarcity. I think isn't there a civil war in Ethiopia now? And they still have the dam. They still have the Renaissance Dam that is giving them so much energy. But despite that, there's a civil war. If that energy didn't solve it, well, that means we're not providing their means of production fast enough. We need to help eliminate poverty even faster to reduce internal conflicts in nations like these. And conflicts between, say, Ethiopia and Egypt is also going to be a big thing. And I wish we had more Western coverage, more global North coverage of that conflict, because it's extremely interesting to me. I think we're finally getting to the crux of the matter in energy development in Africa, and we're sleeping on it in the West here, unfortunately.
Do you think that it's to sort of get back on topic a bit? I think it's that it's like I kind of mentioned that sort of in many ways the nuclear advocacy is extremely dishonest about its touted sort of apoliticalness, and I kind of want to expand on that a bit, which is that I think that this attitude, a lot of it stems from non-proliferation policy. To put my tinfoil hat on again, right? It's like in many ways, sort of it is basically the prerogative of the weapon states to make what they regard as risky technologies, sort of making banning it the norm, right? And so, one of the things that I have told people is that right now Iran is being Iran has been sanctioned for a long time for enriching uranium. Right? What kind of message does that actually send people, right? it means that fundamentally what you're saying is that enriching uranium is a bad thing, right? And look where that got us, right? And Iran should not be punished for enriching uranium. It should be punished for violating human rights within its own borders, right? But there is a lot of it is sort of international. It is a non-proliferation policy jargon at this point. That non-proliferation should be non-political, which is silly, right? Fundamentally, non-proliferation requires people who don't know each other, who might not even like each other very much, sort of cooperating. It is fundamentally political, right? And you can't just say that, on scientific ground, there is no scientific proof, there is no mathematical proof for saying that, certain countries should be allowed to enrich and reprocess and certain countries couldn't, right? It's just silly, and it needs to stop. And it's kind of a long way from our initial topic, which is about sort of nuclear politics in Taiwan. But honestly, it's like it's very related in the sense because as non-proliferation policy currently stands, it very much limits the gamut of things that I can say to my fellow countrymen to convince them that nuclear energy is a good idea. Right now, everything, like things that I can touch my heart and say honestly that nuclear energy is good because, and the only thing that I can come up, and the only two things that I can come up with is climate change and cost. And the cost is in big quotation marks because cost means we're using our old plants which we've already shut down. It does not necessarily include new plants, right?
Right.
And of course, certainly, all the wonderful things that got me into nuclear in the first place, right? The fact that you can close the fuel cycle, you can, the fact that isotope enrichment might be useful for TSMC, right? The fact that you can extract rare earth minerals from nuclear waste. The fact that strontium and cesium are dangerous because they're radioactive, but that's what makes them very attractive to make into RTGs that remote communities can use in place of diesel power. I cannot tell. I am just not allowed to say any of that, which is to say that I can say it, and then people are Taiwanese are going to either ignore me or they're going to say, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Let's go and see." Oh crap! Actually, we are allowed to do that. You were lying to us. What the hell? Yeah.
Well, let's wrap here. Thank you so much for everyone on Twitch and YouTube. We've got a really great body of people here on both networks. So on YouTube, sorry to say, I don't have the mojo to forward you to another stream. I'm going to start to look into that, how we can put a shortcut into the YouTube in order to forward people to a new stream. But on Twitch, I am going to raid into, let's see, who am I going to raid into? There's all sorts of people ready to take your eyeballs. But is anyone doing anything that I like? Well, no, not really. So let's raid one of my friends. I'll expand my network a bit and raid
As
into.
you said that I am probably a bit too old to know what raiding people on Twitch means. So, if you'd like to kindly explain that.
Right. So let's educate the audience. Raiding is a Twitch feature which allows us to basically create a sort of virtual television station. And when this program ends, you will be visiting my friend Adam. And so I will be shifting the audience here on Twitch over to Adam's channel. And that is basically creating a virtual television station so that when our program is over, their program will continue. Of course, their program began already. And so it's a little disjointed. You'll have to introduce yourself again and say, please support nuclear energy.
Yeah.
That's our raid message for today. So Here's the raid. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Your comments matter so much to us. You can watch the Eco-Modernist channel live on YouTube every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Same program will be simulcast on twitch.tv/Soyaddle. That's Seattle without the C. Add in the soy. And remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
I want to speak to you about a new organization called the Eco-Modernist Society of North America. I'm here because we are in the midst of a potentially monumental ecological crisis. It is only through a new environmentalism 2.0 that progress can be made. We believe that our only hope for human advancement and even human survival is through the exponential advance of science in the service of humanity. Eco-modernism is a new environmental paradigm which looks to reverse the fear of nuclear power and scientific progress in general. Ecology-based modernism is the most direct way to define it. Eco-modernism as a philosophy is described in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto. We believe